joint jurisdiction planning commission meeting. I'd like to kick it off and welcome those in attendance and kick it off and open it by opening up the city side of that joint jurisdiction. Ryan, would you note the roll call for the city?
Roll is noted.
Okay, thank you. And while I have the commissioners for a motion to approve the agenda.
Second, Pierce.
Okay, motion and a second to approve the agenda on the city side. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Okay, motion carried. Also, approval of the minutes from our last joint meeting.
So moved. Bacon.
Okay,
Second, Pierce.
okay, motion and a second to approve the minutes as presented. Those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Okay, motion over to the county to open their meeting.
We'll call the meeting to order. We have approval of the agenda.
So moved.
Second.
Approval of the minutes from the last meeting.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Yep. So I think it's you then.
Okay, with that, we'll go to the piece of business on the agenda tonight, which is item number 4, discussion and review of the updated joint jurisdiction zoning ordinance draft. Luke, we will turn it over to you.
All right. Well, thank you for turning it over to me. I'm going to work on trying to get it so that you can see my screen. But we do have a fistful of handouts that have gone out, and if anybody needs an extra one, by all means, we can grab one. But until we can get my computer on the screen, I think we can work off of that as well. So, so today, I'll forego the introduction, aside from noting, again, I'm Luke Muller with First District Association of Governments, and I'm here to help. We've gone through, last meeting, we spent some time, obviously, meeting and a half, talking about wellhead protection areas. Pretty well put that idea to bed. I did some drafting of that, and at some point, we may or may not go over that. Otherwise, we'll probably put it all off to the end. It kind of depends. But today, what the plan is for today is what's on slide 2. We're going to continue this course of reviewing issues where we didn't have clear consensus with the joint board, the subcommittee that we had a handful of years ago. After that, we'll wind up, of course, discussing any other issues as you have, as you run across, as you're looking through this document, the proposed ordinance. And then we'll hold joint public hearings, planning commission recommendations. Same thing I went through last time, as far as the process of what's left. But again, we're still talking about the some of those topics that were the group just knew there was going to be some input from this board. And so today we're going to talk about residences on small acreages on properties zoned as ag in this joint jurisdiction area. So we'll also talk, if we get time, we'll introduce the topic of concentrated animal feeding operations a little bit, more or less just kind of to get you guys warmed up to know where to look, and then just a heads up. That really depends on time, as time allows, and we'll do it that way. So for today, though, let's talk about residences on small acreages in this area, okay? Do you need, am I okay where I'm sitting to talk? Can we hear? Are we okay there? Okay.
Luke,
Yes.
Or can you sit here?
You want me to just throw this onto a thumb and put it over there? You want me to sit there? I can run it from there. Oh, can you?
I got your keyboard and mouse.
Okay. So, let's talk about this topic first. and I'll get back to it. So, from a larger scale, there's a lot of conversation about, so should we do anything with the minimum lot area or anything like that in the joint jurisdiction area? And ultimately, as a whole, the group, the subcommittee that was together, had basically decided that it wasn't in the cards to do that all the way across the joint jurisdiction area from the ag district standpoint. So there were discussions about, well, should we not at all? Should we have a strategic area? And all sorts of those questions. Ultimately, what was found, if you look at that third slide, I'll hit pause on here. Okay. I've got one. Oh, so if I just put it in there, I can run it off of there? Okay. All right, let's try it this way. Let's see here. Sorry about the brief delay here. I was too busy eating ribs to think about doing this, so give me just a minute. All right. Switch this over.
Do you have more than your printout, Luke? We could put printout underneath the dock camera and shine it that way.
We'll just, at this point, I've already got it on here, so we'll do that. That's, in the end, what we'll probably wind up doing. I just had the draft that I think we might need to refer back to a couple times. All right, back in the game here. Thanks for bearing with me. I was wondering how we were going to fill all that time tonight. Figured it out now. So now we're slightly less distracted. I won't start over for you. Go from here, okay? So going back to it. In the discussions of what was talked about, the idea of having residences on small acreages, as we said, was floated around and decreasing minimum lot area and changing things. Ultimately, here's what we found. It doesn't fit in the land use plan for the county, aside from potentially in joint jurisdiction area where the idea was punted, more or less. Say, well, if it's okay with the city and we have this group, this clandestine group, and we figure something out, we'll do it. We'll talk about it. As it turned out in discussing it, and I'm paraphrasing about 2 years worth of meetings, so just bear with me. But what was discussed out of the side from the city's standpoint is that the land use plan for the city really doesn't support small acreage development outside of city limits, unless it is basically in a subdivision, a plan set up. There were some areas, though, as we get to it, where it was figured that long range was probably going to be pretty low density, at least in the planning period, and that's where this compromised idea kind of came from, to go on there. And does that sound about right in 30 seconds, Mike, from the city's standpoint, and anybody that was there?
Yeah, I think that's a pretty good summary.
Yeah. So from that standpoint, what we did, and I just got to get some of this out of my way. So ultimately what was done is drafted a document or a plan that would go about, set about allowing residences on less than 35 acres in the Ag District as a conditional use. And right away, if you're on the county planning board, you're probably screaming in your mind a little bit at the idea that that is getting rid of that minimum 35 acre lot area. What it does is it confines it to an area south of town, is what it amounts to. In that area, there's not a lot of ag development aside from crop growing out in that area. It is also over the aquifer, so you're going to be capped out in terms of any animals that you would have in that area as well. There's some floodplain area too, which would be difficult for housing into that area. So is it awesome land for housing or not necessarily? However, it's more apt to be developed that way for a small area as opposed to, say, some sort of other ag or commercial development, unless you're going to do a subdivision, at which point you'll want to see that annexed anyway. And so that's what the idea was. I've got all these sections listed out here, and I'll go to a map here. Actually, let me just do it now to give you an idea. If you know your town, frankly, you'll probably know it better than I do because I don't have the map on here right this second. We would be looking at, that's South Main, isn't it, that makes the S-curve down there? Am I right? Someone save me. All right, so this just kind of gives you the idea. The hatched area is the area that ultimately would apply to. Okay, those sections I listed in there, that's the area that's hatched there because it's limited to that area in the joint jurisdiction. The reason you have multiple colors in there is what I'm going to go back to in just a second. So I'm going to go back to this. So what would happen is they'd have to apply for a conditional use. And the main reason it's done that way is to verify that they're going to have enough room to put up a house and that they're going to follow these separate conditions as far as how you would put up a house, because obviously a single-family house on 35 acres is okay. So in this case, they'd have to have a minimum lot area of at least 3 acres, and that number was come up with as far as the size. I think that went along the lines of just rationally figuring out setbacks, how far things would have to be, as well as trying to give room for things like shelter belts and then staying off of property lines. But what it does is it sets up a maximum density as well, which is 1 house per quarter section. So it's limited to 1 house per quarter section, which for those that are familiar with it, that's just taking that 160 acre quarter, that's a nice beautiful square from a section, and cutting it one more time, and then suddenly you have 40 acre quarter sections, and you put 1 in each quarter. That's a density rule that you see. Honestly, a lot of counties go by density and not necessarily the minimum 35 acre lot rule. You'll see them just go 1 per quarter instead. It's kind of however each county wants to handle it. So in that case, that's what this is going about, is that density rule. So you go back to it, and I just want to go to here. Let's put all the constraints in there. You look at this map here, this shows what those development constraints would be, okay? So there's a lot going on this map, but what you see is the red hatched is the 100-year floodplain. You see the dots would represent houses in that area that exist already today. The orange area that you have in there, those are the areas that don't already have houses. So those are your quarter sections that would be allowed to have a house on them of 3 acres. I want you to keep in mind, and I just had that question before we started this up, that does mean you can decrease that lot size down to 3 acres, but if there's a house on there, if somebody goes out and builds a house on 35 acres, you've got 1 house in that quarter section, so that one's done. You check that one off the list, and you go to the next one. On there's 61 quarters that are buildable to have a 3 acre lot. Again, these are all south of town as it sits now. I asked Richard to put together a list of just kind of building permit numbers for the last, it wound up being for the last 12 years, as it turned out, dating back to 12 full years, dating back to the full year of 2010. The county average is issuing building permits for 24 houses per year, of which about a third of those go into Lake Park districts on average. The bottom line is that 16 houses per year is what gets issued permits for. Well, if you're talking 16 houses per year and every one of them goes in this area, you've got just shy of 5 years worth of houses just to go in this area. Are they all going to go there? No, they're not. But it does open up that ability that if every single one of them went in there, you got 5 years worth of houses, and no longer do you have to worry about them scattered throughout the rest of the county and complaining about smelly cows. So that's I guess kind of directing that development, and that's what it goes on. The downside, it puts them right in the backyard of the city to grow around. So there's basically the synopsis of how it got there, what the goals and how it went on was. So, as I said, the pros is that it allows opportunities for residents to move out of town without buying 35 acres, albeit in some limited areas, and without rezoning. And it does not open the entire county nor entire joint area to development on small lots. The cons are that it conflicts with the city and county land use plans to a degree, and the area prescribed is in floodplain or shallow aquifer. So that land could be built up, but it is in that area. So there are your pros and cons. So with that, as a very long introduction, let's start throwing darts.
I'd like to ask something, Luke.
Sure.
My recollection is, and Bob and Mike were all there, so I don't know that anybody else was, but we decided against the one per quarter section rule and didn't intend on giving up the 35 acres. There's problems with doing that. A farmer has his or her house sitting on this spot and wants to give 3 acres in that same quarter to one of their kids. They're not going to be able to get a conditional use permit the way this is written. I don't, we talked a lot about that quarter rule and decided against that. That's my recollection. I don't know, Mike, if you guys have a different recollection than that, but I don't think we intended in the joint jurisdiction area when we do this particular type of development that we were having people give up their 35-acre rule for that area, or that we were going to the Minnehaha County type of development where you have building eligibilities and then that's done. You're just done. You can't put another house on that no matter what the circumstances are. I don't think that's what we decided on. I'm sorry.
I recollect, which is hard these days. I recollect when we had that conversation in the quarter section, we were planning ordinance and not the joint jurisdictional one. That we didn't want to go to quarter section outside and allowing 1 3-acre lot on it instead of a 35-acre minimum type deal. As we got into the joint jurisdiction area, again, we ran into the issue of it's now what's the city's comprehensive plan going out. And we don't have that in front of us right now, but at the same time, that had some limits to that type of development in their comprehensive plan area, except most of their development wasn't to the south, it was to the north of town. And your comp plan, is that correct, Mike? Most of that future comprehensive plans to the north.
It goes in both directions, to the north and south. To the south, because of some of the density type development. As you look to the north, it was more of a holding area in that we wanted to see the development occur south first because it could make use of the existing infrastructure investments. And as some of those areas start to fill in, then we'd have to, take a good hard look at what do we want those areas to the north to look like from a development standpoint. We didn't identify the future land uses to the north yet, but it was reserved for urban development to the north.
Yeah, not necessarily the quarter lots out in the joint jurisdiction. It's not your plan. All right, so if we go to the south development that we've got here, that's within the joint jurisdiction now and your city limits as you see it now, and as Luke is addressing it is, it's quarter section, but if you put one lot on 40 acres of a quarter, you've used up the housing ability there. You still have to have a willing seller and a willing buyer to sell 3 acres out of an ag land that might be pasture land, more than likely if it's in the floodplain. So right now they'd have to buy 35 acres. So developing it in low density, is there a desire to have more than one house per quarter section? Is that what I'm hearing from Leanne? Is she has a desire to have more than one house per quarter section? What level of density are we going to look at? Are we good? I mean, then you're talking about a subdivision more than anything else. If you're looking at that type of concentrated housing where you've got those regulations in effect for the roads, the sewer, the water, the access, the fire and safety and everything else, which is a lot different than an acreage of 3 acres on a quarter section. So if we're going to define that as a conditional use to put more than one on quarter, we're going to have to explore the idea of it's a subdivision of 3 acres. Maximum of, 12 houses or something, kind of like a Sunnyview up north or something. There's a maximum number of houses. I think that has to be brought in as a plan. It has to have all kinds of rules and regulations and covenants put in it that can stand the test of time in order to do those types of developments, because if it does get annexed to the city, it has to meet some sort of city standards. And if it doesn't, then have we created something that somebody can't leap later on?
Problem is the way this is written, today, a farmer can sell 35 acres to somebody and they can build a house.
Yes.
Okay. With this, you'd have houses within that quarter. We're making the flexibility of a farmer to do that willing buyer, willing seller thing a lot more difficult than what it is in the whole rest of the county. And I don't think that's what we had discussed.
Well, you wouldn't have to
Well,
buy
just-
40 acres.
Right.
You could buy 3 acres.
We
Right.
can buy. Farmer gives up the building eligibility for that quarter for anything.
Exactly.
Exactly, yes.
Whereas you can sell 35 acres and do the same thing. You didn't really accomplish the 3 acres. I get that, but
What happens when you have somebody clustering them together? It's a quarter, but you can cluster them into the 2 acre quadrants. You know how that goes?
Yeah, that was discussed, and that's kind of, to a degree, that's what Leanne's talking about. Pierce is talking about is that you could do that. We talked about that and kicked that idea around. In fact, we even talked about the idea of doing like mini development or like mini ranchette sort of developments where you'd take like 4 of them in a corner and do that. And the idea was the tracking and doing and bouncing them from elsewhere in the quarter. So the idea was just leave one in each quarter is ultimately where it was left. Could it be done? Yeah, it could be done. You do run into a bit of an issue just kind of clustering them. Where do you cluster them? What's your spacing? They probably need to have an interior road on it. And then where we wound up with was, holy crap, now we're talking about a subdivision. And we got a subdivision on the fringe of town that the city's got to approve, yet there's no prayer of it meeting subdivision requirements. And this is where it wound up landing, was on that. This is what wound up being voted for recommendation.
Why is there interest to put people into a floodplain? Because that's what this is. This is a floodplain area. Involved when they built some houses on the S-curve. 27 dewatering wells when they built those houses. That's just insane. And they still built them. They still fight water. They still cite septics. Even if you have one house, that's too much. Minnehaha County, though, you reference them, but they allow, if you are a large landowner, you can cluster them into quadrants, and then they put them around sloughs. They put them onto the county highway or whatever it is, and it is like a mini development, because that's how Dwayne Schreers made his living down there. He was buying and selling land, and his partner was farming. And so the question, though, is why does a city want to force people to live in a floodplain? That's what this is doing, is saying, we're going to do a spot zone. We're going to put this into the southwest corner as a spot, But by the way, if you're out of the floodplain, oh, that's on the north side or the east side of town. Because that whole area, South Town, it just keeps getting wet. And it's a 100-year flood, but you've got the gray areas that gets equally as wet. And so I've seen it doing the appraisal work inside houses that have mold and mildew or whatever that suspect material is. So I just don't understand. I wasn't here when you guys all talked about it. But Leanne's right on one point, is that if somebody owns a quarter of land and they have their 4 or 5 acre building site and they want to sell part to their son, they can do that today, which is common in the county. But when you take and put one house per 40 acres, you just instantly stopped any kind of rural development concept of small acreages, clustered housing, or whatever it is. And it just doesn't make sense. That's all I'm just saying, is I wasn't here, I'm new, but it just doesn't make sense. So I don't know, I wish there was minutes that we could read. That would really be beneficial if we knew the minutes.
There was a lot of conversation about this. This was the city prefers not to have any housing development in the joint jurisdiction area. I think I said that right, Mike, and I'm not speaking too largely. And these areas that are listed on here are areas where the city never plans on annexing because it's in the floodplain. But there are places in the floodplain where land is high enough to build if somebody wants to do that. And the conversation was that we give people the opportunity to figure that out. There's a demand in Brookings County for people to live on acreages, but we have to find a place where they can do it. That is the question, and the compromise was these areas that the city is never going to want to annex in because you can't do straight row housing development in those areas, that if people could find a place where they could build and not have water problems, they'd have the opportunity to do it in those areas. That, I'm not sure how many of those possibilities there are, but that's what it was. But we didn't do the quarter thing.
So, so then does that also mean that that they bring in a brand new septic system, or how does the septic systems tie into this? Because obviously you can design very watertight septic systems.
I don't think we've gotten that far.
Be part of the conditional uses.
Yeah.
It would be, yeah, as a part of, that was a part of the
I
reason
think that
there'd be
should be in
conditional
writing.
use. You'd more or less fall, but if DNR allows for it, you could do it, or you could go all the way back to go with the floating holding tank, or you could do
Well, in
however you want to look
Minnesota,
at it.
you buy an acreage, you have to bring the,
Exactly.
so
Yep.
that's not in South Dakota. That's Minnesota.
Yeah,
South Dakota, there's no really guideline except you just got to do the perk test. And if you got an existing septic system and it works, you're fine.
yeah, in that case, that's where you'd have then doing a variance to decrease you down to 3 acres, you're doing it by conditional use, so it's legal to do so. However, you can attach conditions, and you can tell them exactly what sort of a septic system you want on that. Is somewhat of the benefit to that. The downside to that is that if you're talking about portions of the county where you've got the water table within 10 to 2 feet of the surface, it's still going to be a challenge.
Yeah, but there's some houses that have existing systems.
Yes, and this isn't going to. This is Virgin 40s is what this is on right now. The way that this is shown here. So it wouldn't be addressing any existing septic systems.
So
that are
what's
out
the
there.
overall goal of putting the residences in it?
To provide some alternative housing options for people that want to live on acreages.
Floodplain. Insurance, as we know, is changing really fast. And there's a brand new flood map coming out. I've seen it. I've seen the draft. And I think some of us have seen the draft, but it's changing our flood patterns here.
I agree with you 100%. I worked some of those options, but got voted down. But I agree with you on that.
Yeah, if I remember right, I think part of the idea, and I'm really digging back into 2 years ago, but I think part of the idea was that over the course of a large area, you'd at least have a shot to within the same property as say I own 40 acres, or I own the quarter, because let's be honest, that's probably what's going to be the case. If I own the quarter, I've got a reasonable shot of being able to have some dirt or fill to be able to build up that area that I can build it up and take it out of the floodplain and do it that way. That's not, but I mean, let's face it, it's still going to be. I'm not discounting the fact that you're raising something up, and at best you're going to have an island with a beautiful moat. But that's, yeah. In the end, I think that was more or less I think Commissioner Pierce hit it as compromise. It's probably the closest term you could use. Like I said, I do remember this is what wound up being voted on out of the group, out of it. So,
We had some discussion also on what availability of lots and what price structure to put. 3-acre lot, I don't know what you'd pay for 3 acres, but if it's desired to have it and we're down to 20 lots instead of 30 or 50 or whatever, price is obviously going to go up on those lots. And then in addition to that is development of the lot when you start the cost of fill to build it up, the shelter belts you want to put in around the particular piece of property. Then you still got your septic system that's going to have to meet code. And then you start adding all those expenses up, it's almost cheaper to buy a lot in town and build a house. Now, you don't have the acreage, but will people that want to build after they've invested in that put a ranch on it, ranch house? No, they're probably going to put a $300 to $500 and some $1,000 house on it. Is this the area that they want to build a $500,000 house in? I mean, it's not our choice; it's theirs, obviously. But if we put the opportunity out there, I don't see these things selling real fast.
So if I understand this, the city doesn't want rural residential in the joint area, right? City prefers not to have rural residential in the joint area. They want to grow the city. And the county, I'm in the county, they prefer to stay with a 35-acre rule and be done with it.
right.
So where's the compromise? You see what I
Pieces that are
mean?
listed.
Huh?
Pieces that are listed there. That was the compromise.
Why do you
Not
want
a
to throw
great
people into a
compromise.
done with houses in floodplains? It's just insanity at best, unless the city is going to provide utilities. You know, if the utility is going to be provided, then why are we talking about 3-acre? Why don't you just go back to the 35-acre rule?
For the people that can't afford 35 acres.
Oh,
But-
Leanne, these houses,
Oh,
I mean,
I
these
know.
building sites, $100,000 for a place out in the county that's 8-10 miles away just for the right to build. It's amazing.
It is amazing, but somewhere in Brookings, it can't be in the city because you can't buy a 3-acre lot in the city and build a house. You can't. One,
Currently an apple orchard next to me, but
one, okay?
it's fine. But you have to have
And-
a septic system.
And you can't build out in the county because we want the 35-acre rule. Somewhere in Brookings County, there ought to be room for a person that wants to have an acreage where they can have a horse or some chickens or, whatever it is that people that live out in the county want that kind of lifestyle, if they're not actually engaged in farming. We ought to be able to have some of those options. This was the best we came up with. It'd be lovely if we came up with a better idea here. But
What's wrong with like Sunnyview up north of town? What's wrong with Sunnyview and Sundoll Edition?
I don't have any problem with Sunnyview.
I mean, Sunnyview is so Sundoll, but Sunnyview has a closed area. It's their own road. They do all their own maintenance. It's got 2 entrances, and they had septics out there. Of course, they did a deal with SDSU to get sewer in. That's a different deal. You got Sunnyview on a Sundoll Edition on the north side. Now, I don't care for how that was laid out, because that's like the nightmare of snow removal, of traffic, of people walking down the middle of the road in dusk and dawn. But the fact that could have been laid out with one in and one out, like a planned development. And, you've got the Sundoll family up there. They want to do a lot of different stuff. And their hands are tied because it's in a joint jurisdiction. It's in the county. They can't do anything.
I'm sorry that Commissioner Krogman isn't here to want to speak to this group on this issue. And I don't think he was able to be here, but that is really his vision, is that we have some residential development areas where people can have bigger than a 75 by 150 lot and develop that in the joint jurisdiction area.
So is it possible to limits and just not have a joint jurisdiction area? I mean, there are cities that are getting rid of them for this issue. It's just confusing.
I'm going to let somebody
Aberdeen
more
does.
knowledgeable than I am address that.
Provision of services issue in all reality. And so, I mean, the easy way for as a person on the side of kind development to be able to truncate that off is to say, well, go ahead and do that and just create a district where ultimately the standard is different for utility provision and that sort of thing. And yeah, maybe it's allowed for septic. It's not quite that easy because it becomes a bit of a, I'm not going to say equal protection, that's not the right term, but trying to provide, why am I being taxed to be able to do the same thing in theory that I could be doing in the country? Problem is, you can't do the same thing in the country. That's the argument that the county's got on it. From the city standpoint, they're going to argue the same thing. Why not county just back off? Just let them have a few of these things. So the thing, like you said, is, you know, why not have another Sunnyview in the joint jurisdiction area? I mean, I worked with them on covenants here many years ago. The fact of the matter is that you go back to creating the wart that you got to grow around. That's why you don't. So if there was a way that you could simply, when we grow to you, roll right through and connect you to services or sign a waiver of right to protest to do that, one, that's not necessarily the city's practice, and two, it's a lot messier than it sounds, to put it nicely. I mean, hell, you're dealing with that on the southwest end of town anyway, right now. The reality is that the idea of the planned development was actually, I was convinced that was going to be the answer. When we first started talking about that, I thought that was easy, and we'll just lob that into here, and that'll be good. But as we talked through more and more, the locations where we'd want that, honestly, it's not nearly as dense enough as the areas, you know, as what the vision is for the community to do that. And so then the idea went to, well, let's do it on the south. Well, then what you said comes up is, do we really want clusters of houses? Do we want 40 houses down there in the floodplain in this 1/4 section or 1/4 section? The answer there went no too. So that's ultimately where they went. To catch it up, and I'd say the same in reality. Maybe there is an answer that planned development is an answer, but that's really it's probably a either you come together here and say, yep, get us a map, we'll figure out where that needs to go in this joint area, or no, it's just not an option, and it's just not in the cards in the joint area either. And then county, if you want to look at a map and see where that would make sense outside of the joint area, you have that talk. That's,
I don't question there's definitely demand for rural acres. There's a huge demand. When people are willing to pay $100,000 for a 2, 3, 5, 10 acre building site, and $100,000 is a lot more than a lot. You have existing developments that are going on that were poorly planned. You know, Sundal Addition is a poorly planned one, the way the road is laid out, but Sunnyview is well planned. And they have about the right size for these horses and chickens and goats and whatever else they want. But the concept of the city saying they don't want this in the joint jurisdiction area, and then you're living in the county and say, well, why are we doing this? That's my issue. And the second thing is, my feeling is the utilities has a history, as they have on the south side of town, given rights to somebody to put one division into a city. They were out of city limits. They got hooked up to the sewer. Within a matter of a short time span, the utility said, no, we're not hooking anybody else up. And then you're left with two developments next door to each other. One has septics and one don't. You have these deals like Novita plant. It's done well for our community, but it dumps in the city's sewer system. Surprise, the city went 2.5 miles out of their way to help them. So then why is the city picking one over another? That's a good question. Septics work great. You have different designs. You can do wetland septics. You can do wetland lagoons. You can do a lot of planning with that, with engineering. But I'm just trying to understand why this is just in a quadrant. Obviously, the east side of town, that's the wellhead protection zone. You got industrial park, you got gravel pits, you got a mobile home court, you've got city services, you got interstate. For the west of town, you got the floodplain, you got the Sioux River, you got the aquifer. The south side of town, as the city grows, we're just going to be dumping more and more water on these folks as the city grows, so it's not going to get any better. And the new floodplain map's not going to help matters. So you really just got two major areas you grow. You go straight north, whether it's northwest, north, and SDSU owns 2.5 miles of land. And then you go northeast and you got the city dump stop and track. So there's so many different areas that we're kind of like an island. And if you lay that map out there, and so if the city doesn't want rural development on rural acreages in the joint jurisdiction area, it just scratches my head. Why don't you start doing a planned development district or something? I mean, Sunnyview is a nice addition, even though they do get the waif of the beef feedlot and the dairy next door, so they appreciate they live in the country. But I just have a understanding of this whole thing, and people will pay a premium right now to move out in the country, even so much as buying 35 acres to build a house.
Brian,
It's just a lot.
Brian, or Mr. Gadsky, I think the issue with the Sunnyview in the city is that Sunnyview, as nice as it is, isn't built to city standards, right? Gravel road, septics.
what's
So
wrong with
if
the
the city was to build to Sunnyview, Sunnyview would have to be brought up to the same standards as the gutter, asphalt, all those utilities have to be brought up to the same standards as the city. So that's the big hiccup here, you know. Now, I'm in total agreement with you that I would like to continue to work on this. I agree with Commissioner Pierce, yourself, that there is a need in Brookings, or there's certainly a demand for these type of lots, you know. So the way this is written and the land that we've identified as being eligible, as the floodplain map is drawn now, half of it's in the floodplain. So you're really down to 30 lots. And to say that, you know, that would take a long time to build. If the land is good and the demand is there and it's eligible, chances are it would fill up quicker than that. We're just not providing that type of amenity in Brookings or Brookings County. So it maybe it's an impossible question to answer, but the bottom line is the way this is written, it's pretty much sending a clear message that in Brookings County, small acreages are you're just not going to have them here. So that's my take on it.
Curiosity, what's wrong with gravel roads?
Mr. Struck could probably answer. There's a reason that hasn't been annexed into the city.
University Estates has city sewer. River Ridge doesn't.
River Ridge has city sewer. University Estates does not.
I know.
So part of the issue is those are the subdivisions that created the original, well, not River Ridge, but University Estates, Bridal Estates, Sunnyview, those are the ones that originally created the need for joint jurisdiction zoning. Because you were having this sprawling development outside city limits, and those are, city limits is right there on 32nd Avenue right now. University Estates, Bridal Estates, they want to be annexed, but they don't want to meet any of the city standards. They don't want to pay for any of the city standards. There's not even right of way. If we went through there and put a residential street in, some of those homes couldn't even park in their driveways because they built so close. Because typically in the county, your setbacks go from the center line of the road, and it's a certain distance. Down there, they don't even have dedicated right of way. It's 20-foot access easements. And so we can't even connect to vacant parcels around there because there's not enough right of way to even put a street in without telling people is you can no longer park in your driveway in front of your garage because your car will hang out into the street because they're so close. They have a gray water system, I think it's University Estates. All of that is in the backyard. Their septics go to the backyard. There's a gray water system. It all needs to be updated. It's pretty hard to get a big vac truck through somebody's backyard to clean out the sanitary sewer system. So we like to put those in the public right of way and access them through manholes. Could things be done differently? Possibly. But these are the same individuals that, however many years ago when these were developed, it was great at that time. But now they're paying the consequences for that unplanned development. It's impeding the city's ability to go around them because they don't want to be annexed. And we can't leapfrog somebody. We have to be contiguous to city limits. There's land that could be developed, but we can't get there because we're blocked. It's no secret that there's the availability of good buildable land in the city is slowly diminishing because of the floodplain and the environmental barriers around us. So if the city of Brookings wants to continue to grow, we have to be wise in how that development patterns occur, and density is one way to achieve that. Building up's another way to achieve that density. But it's not like we have an unlimited supply of land to build on. And so, we looked at those areas. This area that was identified in the map, that's the closest thing to our comprehensive plan being able to support it would be down in this area. I believe it's designated for future low-density residential development. And when we talk low density, it's, for a city, typically low density is roughly around 3 housing units per acre, which would be kind of high density down in this area. You'd have to look at clustering it, finding the highest, driest land, and then, creating your density there. And then those other low-lying areas, you use those, as your drainage areas. But this is the area that would be closest to being consistent with our comp plan for allowing low-density development was to the south.
So you do want residential development in this area?
Into the mic.
It's kind of funny, when you look at those estates south of town, there's so much land around it that could be developed. And so why don't you look at creating a new zoning ordinance that allows gravel areas as a low-income area, affordable?
So
And-
who maintains those?
The city does. They maintain alleys that are gravel. It's no different.
So they're
some-
outside city limits.
Force your city street requirements on them and city sidewalks. It's a way to have affordable housing if you take and look at the way they're laid out, accept them as they are, and get rid of the leaky sewer systems, septics, and hook them up, and then that whole area could start being developed quicker. Because it's a problem the city created, not the county. And I just don't understand. I mean, it just doesn't make sense. You want to put low-income people into area that floods. And that's what ICAP did. And they're fighting with these water in these basements like terrible down there.
I go back to my previous statements. I don't believe this is going to be low-income housing. If we're doing it this way, by the time you fill it, buy it, fill it, develop a system, it's not affordable housing. not under any definition I can come up with. Unless you're going to put higher density into it, then it becomes more affordable. But it takes that density. The other thing I think we talked about at one time, and this goes out to the county, it's outside the joint jurisdiction, is reviewing the 35-acre rule, and that's not for discussion tonight. But that subdivision development, like Sunnybrook, when it was developed, was done well. One wasn't. One south of town, terribly done. And the consequences are being felt out in those areas, and they still don't want to annex unless the city's willing to pay to give them sewer and water and everything else. If we start looking at those types of developments, to me, they need to be on oil roads, surface roads, not on gravel roads, because maintenance gets really ridiculous. It's all right for a guy on one 35-acre lot to travel on a gravel road, but if you put 15 cars in a 15 housing development on a gravel road, nobody's going to be happy. So at this particular time, if you were to look at this map, we do have some asphalt oil-covered roads that go through this particular area. There are some of those that could probably have a multiple housing development on it. It's just not going to be very large, and it's going to have its own access off the oil road. I mean, those things may or may not be desirable, but if they're 3-acre lots and you can get 3 houses in it, is that what we want to see, or is it going to be 2-acre lots? And then we have a problem with how do we write the regulations for those particular developments so that it's not encumbered later if the city decides to move into that particular area with its sewer and water. They're not concerned about the road anymore because it's accessed off a highway, except for the internal roads always stay private. It's a private development. So if we wanted to look at that, allowing something to happen, it may not be 60 houses, it may be 30. Is that doing anything? I still don't think they're affordable. Mr. Drew, you could probably tell me that.
No, they're certainly not. This isn't affordable housing. This is people that, have high incomes. They can afford a 3-acre lot and $100,000 for a lot. Much more than that. So these are high end. They're going to be high end homes.
Would you build a high end home in a floodplain?
Certainly not. So that's why I'm saying this is basically telling consumers that it's just not welcome here, And so I don't know that I'm in support of that though either. I wish there was some way we could identify another area, because I agree with Commissioner Pierce. There is a desire for these type of properties in our.
I don't disagree, but I think that discussion basically goes back to the county and our overall and the
Right.
35-acre rule. And I know there's a lot of resistance to reducing that 35-acre rule. It's not for discussion tonight, but I think the county will probably take a look at that, and I think that's what Mr. Krogman's looking at is not necessarily in the joint jurisdictional area, but outside in the county, those types of developments.
Identifying an area
Right.
where they're
Defining
not
an area,
spread all the way out, but
identify and determine how big or how small they have to be, what size the lots ought to be, and then each of those developments have to come in with an internal road plan of some sort and all their other covenants to maintain that thing, along with their common sewer system or individual sewer systems. That's a whole nother thing that the county can look at, but I'll have to agree with you. I just don't see anybody buying gravel or asphalt and wanting to build a house.
yeah, it's certainly in our area. It's a almost impossible thing to solve, but so I don't have the answer for it. It's just
If you look at north of town between Madera and Interstate, I think it's 42nd Street, which is 2 miles north of Highway 14 bypass. You got City Gardens, you got a racetrack, you've got Sunnyview, Sundol Edition already in that area. You're not going to go north of 42nd Avenue or 42nd Street. That's already, you've got a successful feedlot operator up there. But you've got roughly 5 or 6 quarters of land, 5 quarters of land right there. The Sundol's owns some. I think a Vanderbeek owns another one. You got Brown that owns one, and there's another family north of Radio Tower. Why don't the city just annex that area? Because most of those folks want to be annexed anyway, and then just allow the growth to go that way. That's, you know, I mean.
All they have to do is petition to be annexed.
Well, I understand that, but you've got 3 of the quarters already owned by family that wants to join the city. But they can't
I think you go
because
back,
it's
Brian, and then we're talking about another problem here, and that's the utility aspect of it. And until the city utility department decides to be proactive and running main lines out into those areas, it becomes difficult to annex those particular areas. And I don't know, Mike, if the utilities has made any changes in their development plans to address housing or not.
Not really on the sanitary sewer side routes, and there's routes that can serve quite a large area to the north and northwest.
Not the northeast.
Unfortunately, those areas have been blocked. So now it just continues to get farther, and you have to run longer distances before you can actually connect someone up, and there's a significant amount of stranded costs in that. I mean, I'll just go back to the area to the south.
Yeah.
We just talked with those rural subdivisions last summer, and they want talking roughly $3 million to fix their sewer issues. Spread amongst 50 people, they can't afford it. And so that's some of the things that you run up against, trying to retrofit some of these existing subdivisions. In a perfect world, yeah, if we could get the utilities out there to serve them, that's exactly what you want to do. You looked straight north of city of Brookings. That's one of our major drinking water supplies. That's why they're decommissioning the water treatment plant up there, and they're going to build a new one and take that out. But they have to run pipe. Significant costs associated with getting the raw water from those wellheads back to the plant and then running treated water back. And as you continue to have to, go north of university-owned land, that's farther distances of stranded costs. And so, as landowners show interest, if they're contiguous, they can certainly petition. But I think that is one of the things that's kind of holding them up right now is why be annexed if I can't get connected to the sanitary sewer? I think it's Sunnyview is a little bit of an exception. They're off a lift station that they partnered with SDSU on, but they also need to make improvements to that lift station. And I think, some individuals have looked at opportunities when some of that land came up for sale in the last few years and the costs associated with just trying to even run a force main from that area up north back south to connect to the existing city limit or city infrastructure is cost prohibitive. You can't do affordable housing up in that area. If you're a developer and want to stay in business, I mean, your price points are going to be pretty infrastructure costs.
I don't disagree. If you look at the map that Luke's got up there right now, where it says 20 down from the avenue there, the little bump out is where I live, and there's 6 3-acre lots there, and we're all annexed into the city. And believe it or not, we all have septic systems, we all have gravel roads, and we have rural water. We do have city telephone and city electricity there. So, but north of that property on 25th Avenue North, as it goes north into the area, I think that Brian was addressing out there, that's development potential area. Yes, there's some creeks going through there and some waterways that have to be developed, and it will not be an inexpensive place to develop. It will not be affordable housing, I agree. But there's an opportunity for the utilities to serve that area. I think there's other possibilities to over by the landfill area and some high ground over there. But again, getting utilities to that is probably less expensive than trying to put stuff to other areas of the community. Northwest is where I'm thinking of primarily. But you're outside, there's still, some of that's still in the joint jurisdictional area, don't get me wrong. But it really depends on what the city wants to do or utilities wants to do with development and costs. I agree with Mr. Drew. We just are in a bind with our island as far as developing lands into small lots and affordable housing. You know, the theory that's made by Mr. Krogman is if we develop those areas and people will move out of less expensive houses to move out there, and that those will infill, and that'll become the affordable housing. You know, in a perfect world, that's the way it's supposed to go. But whether it does or not, we'll see. Might increase the population of the city of Brookings on the high-end market.
Well, on the area that I was talking about was where it says 1608 42nd Street is on section 12. You've got those open fields there, and Sunnyview's on the west side, and then you go up to the Sundell family. They have the three, well, basically, what's left of the farmland is those pieces. And the university has a sewer line, granted, city can, university, maybe the city should let the utilities keep that 2 million or million or whatever they get and put it into infrastructure. I do know that some of you may not know that at one time there was an engineering firm that laid out a survey from the city of White all the way to the Brookings. And so they found out that the city of White could be gravity flow all the way to the city sewer system. And I see Mike McClemens here. He always talks about that. The challenge is the city's landlocked, and this little landlocked from a standpoint of the water line, it's just what it is. And they've got some mistakes that were made on the south side, work to fix those, put the requirements in place. Where Mike lives, that is gravel. It seems as though it's working fine. You got alleys all over town that are gravel. People maintain them. Yeah, well, if maybe Mr. Brown wants to develop his, I don't know what his plan is, but obviously he bought that land north of you, the Carver land. And some of that could be developed. I know when I looked at it, it was not feasible. But they've got other motives. So
Just a food for thought. And again, it's not going to get solved tonight, but you know, association maintained development that we're doing here right in town that has city water and sewer. I turn that over to BMU. They will maintain that, service it, but the road is private. Like you indicated, once you get off the main drag, could you do a master plan community with a couple acre lots, identify that area, and then those roads are private within that development, and the homeowners in that area or acreage owners in that area pay an association due to maintain those roads. I mean, again, if they're high-end homes out there and they want to own a 3-acre acreage, chances are they have the means to pay it, and they probably would to have that opportunity. I feel there's that strong a market for these type of homes.
And I'll be honest, sat back here because this is clearly a planning exercise more than anything at this point. I mean, that what we're hearing is there might be a solution out here, but what we have on paper isn't it. Your example, we have those around Watertown, where that's exactly what we do. We have we do not have the sewer and water. I guess it's rural water, and sewer is provided by septic. The one particular subdivision was within the growth path to a degree, and they wound up all had to put their septic systems facing the front, to which if sanitary sewer had to go in, they'd go up to the front and they'd do it that way. It'd be a gray water collection at that point is what would wind up happening. Their roads were required to be paved in those cases, and that's where typically you see a planned development. You do require those, and that's primarily just to guarantee that you're going to have a longer lasting road, and then they're also going to throw money into a kitty. Here's the truth. It's not affordable housing, period. And I think if your idea is that the direct solution to affordable housing is maybe we can find some places out in the county to do it, unless there is a complete and total overhaul of our economic system, I don't see it happening. Not in the lifetime of this plan. So it would be an indirect benefit, maybe, where, like you said, what Mr. Krogman's talked about, that might happen. But the bottom line is that's what you're looking at. The downside to doing, say, any of them on, say, the fringe of town, like, I mean, you've got Commissioner Bartley here, who's on the fringe of town. Brookings already has the problem of having to jump the college. Let's just say it. I mean, you're going to have to jump the college to grow north. In order to create a less dense subdivision like that, whether it's in the city or not, you're going to provide services beyond that. At some point, you're going to. So the downside to doing that is that you either A, create this stretch of where we're going to have less services and do less, and that creates a different concern for long-term taxation and provision of services questions, or you're going to have to deadhead or straight across it in some way, shape, or form. And from a standpoint of, again, practitioners, that's a bad idea to do that to yourself on purpose. And so that's where Mr. Struck and I are coming from on that respect, is that, yeah, you want to cluster that as much as you can from an urban development. The real question is whether or not are we going here, are we going there? And that's where that south one made some sense, although I agree with anybody there, is that throwing more houses at a floodplain has hardly ever been the answer. You just have to look at a couple of settlements along the coast and figure that out. But the bottom line is that's where you're at. So realistically, if you want to tackle this issue, it's probably a bigger issue than this is a development policy question that isn't ready for actual regulation at this point, is what it sounds to me like. Is that this is a development policy, where is that location that we would do this, and then put it together. But this is not it, what that is. That's not going to be the answer, at least not in this context. Does that pretty much summarize the last hour?
Yeah, Luke, is it possible for the county, the city council and the county commissioners to say, this is what we want, and then use zoning boards?
The
City and county. I mean, if the city council and the county commissioners, want housing in the country or housing in the area, if that's what they want, then say, this is what we're asking both zoning boards to come up with a solution.
a type,
Yeah,
you mean?
tight. What do they want? I mean, I hear Commissioner Krogman's story, these acreages and whatever they are, but let the county commission and the city council say, this is what we got elected for, and this is what we're going to do. They control the utilities. Utilities is a quasi-governmental agency. I get it, and the city gets a huge kick every year from the utilities. But there are programs out there, whether they're TIFs or other types of tax incremental financing or grants or whatever, to help pay for this. But it's just this 35-acre thing. When you've got the agriculture to protect, you've got people living in areas, and yeah, Mike, you're right, it's not affordable. It's not even effectively cost affordable. I mean, even for somebody that can afford that $500 or $1 million house, because they're going to go to a lake. Dale said they're going to go to a lake, or they're going to go in another area, or they could buy the Macomb land on Western Avenue that's for sale for some $36,000 an acre or $46,000 an acre, whatever it is. And that's got city sewer right there. And that's got elevation. But that isn't happening either.
Yeah, I mean, to your question, and I'm sitting here trying to think of it on the fly. I mean, realistically, what I would anticipate is you would see a directive in some way, shape, or form, be it from council, commissioners, say, we want one of these, you guys figure out the logical criteria for it, is what it amounts to. That said, I mean, if it's something that as planning commissions you feel like ought to be done as well, you guys can set forth and do it yourself too. And that's kind of, from a standpoint of development, that's it. But I mean, I can see the point of, I can see it in both sides too, that you're kind of in a bit of a standoff in the standpoint of really don't want to put a year into it and then not have, then ultimately have it swatted back. in the same breath go the other way, and county commission say, well, we don't. County commission or city council say, we'd like to see this, and then have it swatted back in the face of, well, there's just no place to do this. So that's kind of where you're at, and then it winds up being, that's where I think when Commissioner Krogman came, the statement, I think the last statement was probably, come with your best idea back to us, I think is what you as a planning commission said, if I remember right, was the last thing. But that's, sorry, there I am summarizing again, not giving you an answer.
Luke?
Can I ask, on this map here where you've identified the
Yep.
acreage, is that 472, there's another mile to the interstate, is there not?
I believe so.
Is
I'm not
there a
mistaken,
reason,
isn't it one
I
more
wasn't part of that, is there a reason why you stopped it there at that mile section?
I'm sure there
And
was.
not ran this?
Oh, you know why? Because that was the end, was that the end of the joint jurisdiction? Or was it, or am I off a mile?
No, the joint jurisdiction goes across the interstate,
It does, but
and then it goes back north.
why did we do that?
You just run out of space on your piece of paper?
Well, I'm wondering that, the more I look at that.
Yeah, it seems like if it is being pushed
Oh.
down here,
No, I know. I think, because are we at, what section are we at there? Is that section 14? No. Where? 13 and 24.
Well,
I'd be farther east. Oh, no. No, we're there. Here's the interstate exit right here on, sorry, I don't have labels on these streets here. Sections 13 and 24, that paved road that's straddled there goes to the interstate. That is the exit.
Okay.
Yeah, that is to it. I was hoping that I didn't miss that. But yeah, this would be, so here's 13, here's 24, and we went in 80 on both sides, is what we did along that road. And then stayed out of 18 from a right? Doesn't that stay out of 18? Stayed out of 18 from a standpoint of logic says it's probably going to have some commercial to
Yeah,
it at some
Luke.
point.
If you scroll up just a little bit,
Yeah.
right in there, and maybe a little bit more,
Go north.
is center pivots.
On the south side of the
I'm not seeing it. Do I gotta go east or west? Oh, yeah, okay.
City ponds. North of that, or south of that.
So, sounds like a planning session in the future regarding planned developments.
Here's a question I've got for you, Luke. We've been at this for 3 or 4 or 5 years already on the county side, trying to rewrite our ordinances and get them in place so that we can actively plan for the future right now, rather than having the question of what are you changing. What's the possibility of us trying to move forward on the joint jurisdiction ordinance with taking this out of it at this point and keeping the rest of it, because I don't think we disagree on the majority of the rest, approving this, and then the county can move forward and finish theirs, and then we can, I mean, if we're going to wait until we have a perfect document on both sides, we're going to be here for 10 more years. It's not going to happen. So if we move forward on these documents that we have right now, that we're pretty much in agreement on most everything except for maybe this, get them approved, get them through both our processes, get them approved, and then come back with that year-long, 2-year, whatever it takes to have that planning session for doing something to amend it later. I'm just worried that our ordinance is taking too long to get approved. We're just sitting in a gray area for the last 3 or 4 years, and that doesn't help the planning office for us, and I'm not sure about the city.
Is there a reason you didn't make this suggestion an hour ago?
I didn't want to get thrown out of here.
So if this came out, where in the ordinance with a person's right to have a single-family residence on a 35 acre parcel?
In the ag zone in the egg zone section that lists the permitted uses and then the minimum lot area. So what would happen is, the use, what we did is we created a use that was residences on small acreages as a conditional use number, I don't remember what, in the ag district. And then it required a conditional use, and it was subject to section 5.21 is what it was subject to. And so ultimately what would happen is you would strike that use, and you'd get rid of section 5.21 and remove the definition, and that would be gone. And then you would have your planning discussions to talk about not this, but something else in the future as you're in tandem working on this, or you wait and you finish this and this being the rest of the document and getting that done.
Question being, the 3 acres would go away, the 35 acres would stay.
Yes.
Correct? Yes.
Yes, and the 30, it was only it was a use that to have less than 35 acres on it, again, because there's no hardship there. So you're not doing a variance in those cases. So that was ultimately what it was. So you
And
just
the county
cut that
could
use
have
out.
that discussion on whether it retains the 35 acres or does subdivisions in the county or in the ag districts. Joint jurisdiction later if it happens to be that those developments need to be in joint jurisdiction.
Yeah, as of now, the land use plan leans absent the input of the city at the time, is what that was. So-
Well, and that was because the county didn't want to give up the 35 acre rule. So
Exactly, yep.
if the county is going to have that discussion, I'd still have it as an amendment to our plan down the road because it's going to take some work to put that together.
Yeah. Primarily, I think the document exists or the example exists, and sorry, city, anybody here. The template's out there
Yeah.
as far as how to do a plan development, something like that. Realistically, the bigger lift in question is where.
Yeah.
Now, let's face it, we just kicked around the city of Brookings in the last hour as far as where to put it around the fringe there. We kicked it around for 2.5 years in a group there around the fringe. I'm fairly comfortable to say that there is not an easy fix in the fringe of Brookings after all of what we've discussed. Might there be a fix? There might be. It's not easy. It's pretty clear.
So at our last meeting, Luke, you said that it would not be in the joint jurisdiction, the ag ordinance as the county adopts it. It would be the ag ordinance as adopted in the joint jurisdiction.
Correct.
And so the county has a lot of rules on housing that, I'm just going to be honest with y'all, I'm never quite sure exactly what we're doing. When you need 35 acres for this, but if you had a house there before 1875 or whatever that year is, or if you're doing something with a relative, you can do this and all of that. How does that all show up in this particular ordinance then? Because we'd go by what's written in here, not by what the county's putting in its new ordinance, right?
Correct. The way that it's listed in here is it's a minimum 35 acres for a lot area. There are a couple of exemptions and it's the document or the reference is changed to an existing farmstead exemption, which is essentially where you're going with those exemptions to change them. And it was duplicated, so it's not a variance anymore. It's a conditional use again, because again, variance is narrowly defined in state law. But there were 3 types, and those came out of the subcommittee, the ag subcommittees from many years ago when the county was looking at it, and it's apparently not wanting to go down to it, so I'll go down to here. So ultimately, those exemptions, or as I call them, get out of jail free cards, are where you had a single-family farm dwelling is requested on an existing farmstead, lot's not over zoning of the shallow aquifer, dwelling is located on the same legal as the existing farmstead. So this is the farm worker or the relative, is what this one is. Letter A is if you want to haul a second house out for a relative of the farm owner or an employee of the farm. Farmstead B is probably the most similar to the one that was there for a long, long time before. You describe what that period of time is, and they can carve off a piece that is at least 5 acres and create that lot. There's a definition. I'm sorry, I didn't bounce right to that of the existing farmstead. And then the third option was zoning official may in accordance with 5 acres in the same quarter. Basically what this does is allows them, and the example is, mom and dad have the house. Let's just look at it from what I've got on the screen here. Let's say mom and dad have the house, or whoever has the defined area here that's in a dotted line. They could move that, they could sell to a kid a small 5-acre piece anywhere within that same quarter. And the reason for that is because chances are, if we're in a farming situation, the kid's not going to be able to buy the whole quarter section and put up a house. It's going to be a case like that. So there are your 3 exemptions. I'm sorry, off the top of my head, I don't have the year on there, but it goes back to the existence of 35-acre rule in the county is what it amounts to. So those are the 3 exemptions as they would sit today.
Basically be the same, updated as like we have right now in the existing
It is.
joint ordinance.
It is. There's only one difference, and that does, for what it's worth, Planning Commission, City Planning Commission, probably don't have a ton of experience with this, and County Planning Commission, I know you do have experience with it, but the subcommittee recommendation at the time, as the discussion was going on, was that just saying it was lived in over some 10-year period sometime in the past, kind of to your point, Commissioner Pierce, was a little too soft. And so wanted some specifics to it. And that, so it got narrowed down a little bit is what that did. And it's in the definition of this section. I'm sorry, I've got it, but the definition of an existing farmstead is in this document. It'll be in there as far as dates go. And I'd be happy to actually just do a brief intro to that next time, if you want, just so you know what is out there. But let's face it, it's not the fix. It's not the fix if you're looking for a fix to it.
There's essentially 3 parts to this as far as moving forward and getting our ordinance plan and the joint jurisdiction approved and moving on and amending it later. The 3 parts are the utilities, the city and its comprehensive plan, and the county's 35-acre rule that all need to be discussed along with subdivisions in each of those areas. But most importantly to me is the utility aspect of this discussion. I don't think we've had a discussion with the utilities because obviously it doesn't go out into the county, or the city has had a real long, hard discussion with utilities. Utilities, I think there needs to be a political pressure put on utilities for a more comprehensive plan for the future. That involves the TIF districts or other things that Brian had talked about, funding mechanisms to get those things put out there so that we can develop. That's a whole nother discussion that has to happen as part of those 3 parts, us, our planning commissions, and the utilities. But it has to come, unfortunately, from the political side of it, the county commissioners and the city council people, politically. Tough.
In the minutes.
So I know we're coming up on our time frame here. Our next meeting date, when you want it to get together again. So March 1st will be our regular scheduled meetings. The city will be meeting at 5:30. County 7 o'clock still.
Yeah,
Okay.
7.
I have a really strong suspicion that a special meeting the following Monday is out of the question. That is typically the Summit League tournament. I don't know how many plan to attend, but I think we could struggle getting quorum, especially if the Jacks are playing, on that Monday at some point in time. Tuesday, we have a city council meeting that evening. Thursday, we have Historic Preservation Commission in this room at 6 o'clock on the second Thursday of the month. So I don't know if it's something we feel that we can hash out in between the regular meetings or we need a special night devoted to this. I also understand as we're coming upon nicer weather, and I have a feeling most of you don't want to spend an extra evening in here. So, looking ahead, thoughts?
March 14th, Monday.
I'm out of town. I won't be here.
Okay.
basically from the Thursday before that through that following week, I would say don't plan on seeing me. What do your agendas look like for this next month? I'm looking at you, Mike and Ryan.
It's a normal agenda. We'll probably have about 3 or 4 items on our regular meeting, so it's pretty full.
I'll run you up then.
Yeah, I think March 1st is out because we also have a consultant coming in for training that
You
night
do?
too. At 7.
Oh, really?
Is it pushing too hard to talk about another meeting in February? We're never going to get done.
I don't think I'll be able to make it down this month. I've got meetings every week now. Basically, I've got meetings every week now until May. What about Thursday? What about the 3rd, 4th? What about the 4th? 3rd, math, not my strong suit, sorry.
March 3rd, correct? I was
March,
looking.
yeah, Wednesday, Thursday, something like that. Thursday.
Is there anything going on historical wise or on your
Nope.
side, Mike?
No, on our side, staff, we got that Thursday off. We're good. The first Thursday of the month. Typically, there's no meetings scheduled in here, so we could schedule it. It's more of the availability of the members.
Mm-hmm.
The other thing I would say is if you've got an idea, pitch it to staff, whether it be the city or county side, so we can start fleshing it out and seeing how it could potentially work. If it's a potential solution that we can kind of fine tune a little bit to bring, to get back in front of you so we can make some headway on this.
For now, my plan is to put this idea aside, and we're gonna move on to the next 2 topics. Are gonna be feedlots and gravel pits, and that's basically then it's gonna be ad hoc. Start lobbing ideas at the wall of other things. I'm really seeing this as 1, maybe 2 more meetings of specific topic, maybe 1 more after that of here's an updated draft in looking in the mirror of what you discussed, and that's probably going to be the meeting where I'm going to hope to have some input from you if there are some other topics that you wanted to address with this document. It sounds like, again, going back to what Mike had said too, is that this particular topic we talked about was always the closest to a consensus we could get, and that was why there was no belief that this was a guarantee to get through. Anyway, so I would be tickled. I would be absolutely thrilled if you guys are okay with it. Might cut into my barbecue eating time, but
Then I think after March, it's going to be June would be the next time, maybe depending on the weather. Just depending on our board coming up with the busy season. Maybe April, if we could squeeze a early April meeting in there. But just letting you know that would be the next time frame for our side. March, April, skip May, hit back on it in June.
is there, well, since we got 3 whole minutes. What if any prayer, I'm this far out, I probably have a better shot of trying to plan something later in March. If we wind up having to do, because the reality is that the things that I've got out here that we had listed as let's punt and talk about were big deals. We had feedlots and gravel pits left. We don't get through it all at this special meeting on Thursday the 3rd. Any reason we don't come back the week before your next meeting You know, so the last week in March and do it that way instead.
Yep, or like the week of the 21st or the 28th of March. Let's looking at those days. Let's set up our second meeting and we'll go from there. We'll plan on 2 meetings coming up to get this thing rolling, providing you're available.
Well, that's the deal. I mean, realistically, that month, I'll have a shot. Best would be the last week of the month for me. Would be best for me. But I'm betting if I get enough time ahead of time, I should have time. Well, yeah, because I'm meeting daytime in Kynan County. So yeah, I should be okay to meet night too. And frankly, you guys are covering the gravel pit one anyway, because you guys wrote it. What do I care?
So the last week in March, what date are you proposing? Which night?
I will say Monday.
That works for me.
March 28th. Anything going on city side, Mike? You have historical meeting or anything, or?
There's a couple of us that are very hopeful that we're not back in town yet.
That's what?
We'll be in Dallas for Nationals. If
Okay, how about Thursday?
Is that a whole week
Luke?
deal?
That's 30.
Yeah, I'm okay with that.
31st?
sorry, I'm out. We got, and this room's not available. That's our council retreat. There'll actually be a speaker here that night from open to the public, couple-hour presentation on growth and development. Chuck from Strong Towns. It'll be televised. So that'll be coming out. Press release. It'll start at 6 o'clock. Mr. Farjan and who's our vice chair are invited to be present at the council retreat that night out at the Swiftel Center. So staff and some of our members won't be available on the 31st, I believe. Is that the... Yeah. Thursday, Friday, Saturday is our retreat. Greg, you'll get an invite shortly.
So 28th, 31st, are out. What about the 24th?
Yeah, we're Nationals.
Flying out?
Same time?
That's first
Same
day,
deal?
first games. Yeah, well, just put it this way. I'm gone, and you guys can do this without me, but I will be out of state from the 18th through the 28th.
And I'm out the 10th to the 21st. So, okay.
But I don't have to be
Yep.
here for you guys to
Same
make
thing.
progress
Yep.
on this.
What
Sounds
about
good.
the 29th and 30th?
Yeah.
Sounds good.
What-
Wednesday'd be not so good.
So how about Tuesday, the 29th?
That sounds like a wonderful day.
29th would work because there's 5 Tuesdays, so there's no council meeting on that 5th Tuesday.
5:30?
Good by me. Earlier the better. I can always blame you guys when I tell my wife what time we're meeting, so that's fine. So, what did we say? 29th and
March 3rd at 5:30 and March 29th at 5:30.
Luke, when will we start seeing the revisions?
of this document?
Yes.
Yes. Well, that's really, how do you want them? Do you want them all at once after we've done these next 2 meetings? Or do you want me to send you one and then resend you another one and then resend you another one?
What's everybody's feelings?
I think we could continue revisions forever, so let's send us one document and everybody take the time to look at it and make your notes. So revision 2 would be the only one hopefully necessary.
So let's, I shouldn't have asked it that way. Here's what I hope. I hope that you say, Luke, that would be awesome if after that March 29th meeting and whatever changes we make, you go ahead and put them all together and send them back out to us. Because let's face it, we just talked, Richard just made the point, and it's a good point. We're probably not meeting in April. We probably ain't even meeting in May. They'll give you some time while you're farming to sit down and read this and enjoy it. And then come back in June full of vinegar and excitement and about planning and zoning, and we can take care of this thing. So that's kind of what I'm thinking. In the meantime, as you've got that draft, you can, if you get ideas, go ahead and fire them off to me. And we do that. But that's what I'm figuring is that after that, then take 2 weeks, fire it back out to you, and you guys have a combined draft again.
So,
And what I'm going to do for what it's worth is I'm going to take, I decided to mark the changes from the draft that you would have gotten originally. So I'm going to keep doing it that way so you can see strike and underline from what it was. I realize it's not quite proper to do it that way, but that way you can tell, see, Luke actually did do something between this one and that one. So that's what I think I'll do, okay?
So Luke, some of us don't have the ability to do two things at once. So could you put together an audio book so we can farm and listen to the joint jurisdictional agreement?
The prologue. It was the best of times, it was the worst of times. Yeah, that's right too.
Luke, just send them the digital version of it and have them change it so it reads out loud, and then you can just page through.
Now
and just play it.
you're passing past my ability to do that sort of thing. I thought I heard that.
Could we have a confirmation of those dates again for the next two meetings?
March 3rd, March 29th. Not to mention your one on March 1st. 5:30. Yep.
Is there a motion to adjourn?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
We're out.